Many Jewish people and non-Jewish people will correctly point out to me that the Christian timeline doesn't match up with the Talmudic timeline of the Jesus narrative. So you have in the Talmud different stories about a certain character called Yeshu HaNotzri, Jesus the Nazarene. Yeah? And also other stories that have been understood to be referring to the same character, even though he's not named. We understand it's him based on tradition, based on little subtle clues, or based on his dad's name, based on the narrative. We can understand that it's the same character. So we have at least 5 different places in the Talmud, at least 5 different stories about Jesus. You can even go on Sefaria and just type in Jesus in the search bar. You can filter it to Talmud, and you will see every time he's mentioned in the Talmud. And people will correctly point out, like, hey, the timelines don't match up to the Christian narrative, because the Jesus in the Talmud, was at least, a bunch of years apart from the Jesus in the Christian story, at least according to the Christian timeline. The thing is, Jews and certain non-Jews will use this as proof that the Talmud cannot be talking about Jesus of Christianity. And I have an argument against that, and my argument against that is Maimonides, Rambam, the biggest codifier of Jewish law, the biggest rabbi in history probably since Moses himself. Maimonides talks about Christianity, clearly talking about Jesus from Christianity, and he calls him Yeshu HaNotzri, the same term that the Talmud uses. So I find it almost impossible, or actually impossible, that they're not the same character. If Maimonides, the biggest codifier of Talmudic law, who wrote the book and said if you don't want to read the whole Talmud, you can just read this book, Mishnah Torah, if he calls this character by the same name as the Talmud calls it, it's obviously the same character. So these people are obviously wrong when they say the Talmud is not and cannot be talking about the Christian Jesus. That's obviously wrong. Maimonides, I believed that Jesus of the Talmud is the Jesus of Christianity. So they're wrong. But what's funny to me, besides for them being dead wrong, what's funny to me is that they want to use the Christian timeline to prove that the Talmud is not talking about the Christian Jesus. Since when do Jews trust the Christians for anything, dude? We don't quote the New Testament. We don't believe the New Testament is holy. We don't believe the New Testament is anything. To us, it's a work of fiction. So why are you using the Christian Bible and the Christian narrative and the Christian timeline to disprove that Jesus is mentioned in the Bible? Dude, when it talks about Jesus in the Talmud, which is the oral Bible, yeah? It's obviously Jesus from Christianity, and you cannot tell me, based on Christian sources and Christian timelines, that it doesn't match up. Since when do we give two hoots what the Christian timeline believes? They also believe Jesus is God in the flesh. They also believe he was born to a virgin. They believe all sorts of things that we don't believe. So it's hypocritical and ironic that Jews that reject Christianity, they hate Christians, they hate Christianity, they hate Jesus, even though Jesus is a Jew. And I learned recently, by the way, that the author of Pirkei Avos was actually the teacher of Jesus, Yoshua ben Parachia. And when he writes to judge all people favorably, he was talking about Jesus. He was trying to rectify what he did wrong with pushing Jesus away. Okay, so all of this, first of all, shows me Jesus wasn't a bad guy. He was pushed away by a teacher who made a horrible mistake, and the teacher tried to correct it by putting down into the Pirkei Avos, judge all people favorably. He was talking about Jesus, his student, that he pushed away by not judging him favorably. And second, it's just funny that idiots on the internet, on my Facebook and YouTube or wherever, they hate Christians, they hate the Christian Bible, they hate Jesus, even though Jesus is a Jew. They hate it so much, and suddenly they're relying on the Christian timeline and the Christian chronology and the Christian Bible to show, like, oh, see, the Talmud can't be talking about that Jesus. It must be a different Jesus the Nazarene. Yeah? There's another Jesus of Nazarene, that went astray and led other Jews astray with idolatry and that we killed on the eve before Passover. Yeah? Listen, I know the story doesn't match and the timeline doesn't match because Christianity has a lot of bullshit in there. They don't have the tradition that we have. They don't have the Masorah. Dude, in the Council of Nicaea, they literally voted what should be their doctrine. Their official doctrine was voted on. You can't vote on doctrine. It's either true or it's not true. So this video is not to bash Christians. This video is to bash these fake, apologetic, twisted people that all day want to bash Christianity as if it's the worst thing that ever happened and that the books are totally illegitimate. But suddenly, when I bring up valid points proving and showing that Jesus is mentioned in the Talmud numerous times, and we have many stories about him, and we have a lot of context about what happened, they want to refuse it. On what basis? Oh, it doesn't match the Christian timeline. You don't believe the Christian timeline. You don't believe anything about Christianity. Why are you suddenly quoting me Christian scripture and Christian timelines? Hypocrites. Morons. Straight up. Yo, l'chaim u'levracha, bro.